What does not disappear in all this is the I as universal, whose seeing is neither a seeing of the tree nor of this house, but is a simple seeing which, though mediated by the negation of this house and so on, is all the same simple and indifferent to whatever happens in it, to the house, to the tree, and so forth. The I is merely universal, like now, here, or this in general. I do indeed mean a single I, but I can say no more say what I mean in the case of I than I can in the case of now and here. When I say this here, this now, or a single item, I am saying all thises, heres, nows, all single items. Similarly, when I say I, this singular I say in general all is. Everyone is what I say. Everyone is I, this singular I. When science is faced with the demand, as it were an acid test it could not pass, that it should deduce, construct, find a priori, or however it is put, something called this thing, or this one man, it is reasonable that the demand should say which this thing, or which this particular man is meant. But it is impossible to say this. In section 92, we're going to see a similar dialectic played out within the subject, or in terms of subjects, those who are engaging in sense perception. As we've seen earlier with the objects of sense perception, we're going to see the same movement to a universal and towards a kind of problematic that then introduces for us. So let's go back to where we left off with section 101. We have one eye over here that's seeing a tree. Sense perception for it is its seeing, its activity of seeing the tree. Remember, it is what has fixed that tree as being what sense perception is about. On the other hand, there's another eye over there that's seeing the house. And now notice that they can actually communicate with each other. They are capable of entering into relation and of seeing that, no, sense perception is not just confined to the activity of this one eye. There's other eyes out there. So what can we do to overcome this? Well, we can talk about an eye in general. We can move to a universal with this. Why can we do that? Because we're human beings, because we actually do share a lot in common, because we're both spirit or subject, or however you want to talk about it. So he says, what doesn't disappear in all this is the I as universal, the I in general, whose seeing is neither a seeing of the tree nor of this house, but a simple seeing. So what we have going on here is a negation, and we also have a negation here. A negation which doesn't say, no, I over there, you're not seeing the house. It just says, what the I as universal is seeing is not the house, is not the tree. It's just whatever happens to be seen. So once again, we see the same structure of the universal as both negating and being what its particulars are, and doing so by way of mediation. That's what it means for something to be a universal for Hegel. So he says, it's all the same, simple and indifferent to whatever happens in it, to the house, to the tree, etc. The I is merely universal, like now, here, or this in general. Here's where we get to a really important point. Hegel says that I do intend, I do meinen, I do want or have in mind a single I. So what we have here is singularity or particularity versus universality. What is meant versus what can be said, what can be expressed linguistically. So I have in mind this I that is me. Or maybe if I'm, kind of humble, it's the other I care more about that. But hey, for Hegel, that's not usually the case. So I want to know about this I that I am and the sense perception that I'm having, and I don't want to just like vanish into this I in general or the universal I. But I can't quite keep that from happening. because I can't express, at least not at this stage, what it means for me to be that I. He says, I can no more say what I mean in the case of I than I can in the case of now and here. With now and here, we can talk about, well, I mean day, I mean night, I mean horse, I mean kite, I mean, whatever you want. But I couldn't quite explain to myself what I mean by now in general or here in general, and what the relationship was between the now that I have, that I want to hold fast, and now, we might say, written in capital letters. It's the same thing with the self, with the I, the individual. It says, when I say this here, this now, or a single item, when I try to make it particular, when I try to make it determinate, by virtue of the fact that I'm saying it, I'm already translating it into universal terms. So by saying this here, I'm already saying here in general. So he says, similarly, when I say I, this singular I say in general all I's. Everyone is what I say. Everyone is I, this singular I. There is no absolute priority of the individual I that I am over other I's. You might say that one manifestation of that is the fact that I don't have the monopoly on the word I. And it's kind of interesting when you think about it. Hegel doesn't go into this here, but it's worth thinking about this linguistically, because this might actually help you understand what he's trying to say. If the word I only meant this I, then it couldn't actually mean I. That may sound a little paradoxical. Let me say that one more time. But let me substitute another word. If I were to say goobity goobity goob and gesture to myself and mean what I mean by saying I, and insist that only this is goobity goobity goop, none of those other ones, like you watching, are that, then what happens to that weird nonsense thing that I've made up? It is just a nonsense thing. What happens if let's take another example. What happens if I say, only I am Greg? There's no other Greg. Now, there's not only a lot of other Gregs, there's also a whole bunch of other Greg Sadlers. There's one who's a photographer, there's, all sorts of other ones. I haven't tracked them all down, but there's a whole ton of them. But let's say I was crazy enough to say, Greg Sadler refers only to this object and only to this object, and nobody else shall ever use that locution again. Then it would quickly mean just a proper name, and it wouldn't signify me. It wouldn't signify what it is to be a subject, and it would probably pass out of currency pretty quickly. So by being I'm already sort of losing myself in the other I's and in the universal I. And the same thing is happening to all those other poor I's as well. He says, when I say I say in general all I's. Everyone is what I say. Everyone is I, the singular I. Because you can say I to me just as much as I can say it to you. When science, he says, is faced with the demand as if it were an acid test it could not pass, that it should deduce, construct, find a priori, so we're talking about abstract processes here, right? Or however it is put, something called this thing, or this one man, when it has to turn to singularity or particularity. It has a hell of a time, doesn't it? He says, it's reasonable that the demand should say, which this thing? If you're going to talk about individuality or singularity or particularity, you can't do that in purely general terms. You have to be able to somehow gesture or point out or give some sort of indications. But what's going to supply that for us? That's one of the questions that hasn't been answered at this point. So what we're left with is a kind of diffusion of the I that is the one perceiving into the general I. Since certainty thus comes to know by experience that its essence is neither in the object nor in the I, and that its immediacy is neither an immediacy of the one nor of the other. For in both what I mean is rather something unessential, and the object and the I are universals in which that now and here and I which I mean do not have a continuing being, or are not. Thus we reach the stage where we have to posit the whole of sense certainty itself as its essence, and no longer only one of its moments, as happened in the two cases where first the object confronting the I, and then the I were supposed to be in reality. Thus, it is only sense certainty as a whole which stands firm within itself as immediacy, and by doing so excludes from itself all the opposition which has hitherto obtained. The movement that we're charting out in section 103 might appear to just be bringing us full circle, but as I'll suggest, especially as we move into 104, we should probably think of this rather as something more like a spiral or a cycloid, rather than just a mere circle, a vicious circle, where nothing has actually been achieved or attained. Where are we going? Well, let's take a look at what Hegel's saying. We've been talking a lot about sense certainty, and we want to know what is the essence of sense certainty. This is the question that we've been asking ourselves the entire time. Another way of expressing this is what is the truth of sense certainty, and we've made a number of transitions. We started out by talking about the object, and we've realized that no, the essence of sense certainty does not lie in the object. And then we eventually came to, and we just in the last few paragraphs, talking about it in terms of the I, the subject, the one who is actually knowing, who's doing some sort of agency, who's doing the perceiving. And that gets negated as well. That is not the essence of sense certainty either, in part because there can be multiple I's. And there's a little bit of reflexivity built in here as well. So we're left with a question then. What is the essence of sense certainty? Now to answer that, that's why the rest of this diagram is here, we need to think about what is going on with the I and the object. So he says, the immediacy of sense certainty is neither an immediacy of the one nor the other. For in both, something mediated is happening. It's actually split into two parts. On the one hand, the object reveals itself to us as a universal, as having a now, as having a here, as being what those are. It also gives us a kind of specificity. So the now can be day, and the here can be a tree, or it could be a car, or it could be, an ocean of chalk, or whatever you like, right? But the object is, in fact, a universal of some sort. Likewise, the I is also a universal, and it's doing something different than the object is. The object is giving itself. The I is what is intending or grasping the object. So what we have going on, he says, these are universals in which that now and here and I, which I mean, because each of these actually is not just a universal pertaining to many particulars, but something determinate. And what I mean in perceiving it, what it is that I intend in grasping the object as it presents itself to me, is something particular, something that I can mean, but then that's something that is vanishing. It's something that I'm not able to express, something I can't articulate fully in language, because language deals with the universals, right? So he says, the now, the here, and yet also the I. There's a reflexive relation going on here that's not happening on the side of the object, but is happening on the side of the subject. These are all revealed as not having a continuing being, as vanishing. So he says, they are not. So we reach the stage where we have to posit the whole of sense certainty as its essence. And no longer only one of its moments. No longer just the I or just the object. Instead, the essence of sense certainty, if we want to erase this circle here, is the whole darn thing. That's what the essence is. The essence is the whole, the entirety. All of these things together. Now, there's something really interesting going on here, because he says this is presenting itself as immediacy. He says, only sense certainty as a whole, which stands firm within itself as immediacy, and by so doing excludes from itself all the opposition which is hitherto obtained, is what we're looking for. So what have we done? We've actually brought all these things back in together, and we have what looks like immediacy, and what Hegel is at this point asserting to be in fact immediacy, and we'll have to see whether that continues on. But it is the entirety, the whole, not just one of the individual moments that we could isolate out. That's what's really going on in sense certainty. This pure immediacy, therefore, no longer has any concern with the otherness of the here, as a tree which passes over into a here that is not a tree, or with the otherness of the now, as day which changes into a now that is night, or with another I for which something else is object. Its truth preserves itself as a relation that remains self-identical and which makes no distinction of what is essential and what is unessential between the I and the object, a relation, therefore, into which no distinction whatever can penetrate. This I, assert then that the here as a tree, and do not turn round so that the here would become for me not a tree. Also, I take no notice of the fact that another I sees the here as not a tree, or that I myself at another time take the here as not tree, the now as not day. On the contrary, I am a pure act of intuiting. I, for my part, stick to the fact that the now is day or that the here is a tree. Also, I do not compare here and now themselves with one another, but stick firmly to one immediate relation. The now is day. So as I mentioned just earlier with section 103, in section 104, we're seeing what seems to be, at first glance, just coming back to our starting point, having gone in one big circle. And you might say, well, perhaps it's a vicious circle, or perhaps we didn't really get anywhere. We left home and we came back and came in and everything is exactly as it was. And Hegel almost gives you that impression in this section. That's going to be changed a little bit as we move into 105, 106, 107, as you'll see. But it's important to linger with this. Now, I do want to suggest to you that instead of seeing it as a circle, you should look at it as something more like a spiraling in, getting closer and closer to the heart of things. Or you could look at it as spiraling out and incorporating more and more. So what have we found sense certainty to consist in? He said it's pure immediacy. And you notice that we began with it as pure immediacy, and now we've come back to it as pure immediacy. So what implications does that have? Well, we've learned that it's not concerned with the otherness of all sorts of things. And what are those things? The here, the now, the I. Why is it not concerned with those? Because in immediacy, it can't focus on the fact that these actually do contain otherness within them. They have mediation, as we've seen as we've gone through that. Here is a universal. Now is universal. Even I is a universal, even though it's this I, this particular I, or the particular I who was writing in Hegel's book at the time. Notice there's already a splitting there. Who is carrying this out? Or as you're following along for the ride, you're the I. So he says that this pure immediacy is no longer concerned with the otherness of the here, as a tree which passes over into a here that is not a tree. That's what he means by the otherness. Or with the otherness of a day, the now is a day which changes into a now that is night. Or for the I, who can be you as I, or I as I, or we can have multiple objects. So where does this leave us? Are we back in the pure moment of perception, in something that truly is unmediated, pure immediacy. Well, let's follow this out. How does he sketch this out? He says, its truth preserves itself as a relation that remains self-identical. So there is a relation there, right? But it's a self-identical relation, which means that it's the same as itself. That what's on one side is the same as what's on the other side. So this is an overcoming, in a sense, of the distinction between the essential and the non-essential. They're both there, they're both part of it. And, you know, they put the and in capital because that's really what he's stressing here. Or the I and its object. They turn out to be, in some respect, at least at this point in time, at this point in the development, they turn out to be identical to each other, or they're made identical to each other. Now, how does this actually work? Here's where we start to get to some of the cracks in the foundation of this, if we want to use that kind of metaphor. He says, we're not making any distinction between what's essential and what's inessential, between the I and the object, a relation therefore into which no distinction whatsoever can penetrate. So we're saying that these are not even really distinctions, and we're not going to look at anything else. So what do we have? He says, well, you know, in this case, we have the I, and we have the tree. There's our this, our here, and it's day. And it's in a pure immediacy that doesn't let anything else in. How does this work? He says, this I, here's the key term, assert that the here is a tree, and I don't turn around so that the here would become for me not a tree. So I don't look at anything else. I maintain myself in that posture of just looking at the tree and saying that's all there is. What else? He says, I take no notice of the fact that another I sees the here as not tree. So I'm blanking out other people as well. Or that I myself at another time take the here as not tree. I'm ignoring that part of myself as well. The now is not day. On the contrary, I'm a pure act of intuiting. I stick to the fact that the now is day, or that the here is tree. I also don't compare here and now themselves with one another, but stick firmly to one immediate relation, the now is day. So what's going on here? It takes a certain kind of choosing or activity or persistence, or you might even say stubbornness, to bring this off. And how long can one keep doing this feasibly? That's a good question. Is it possible to maintain oneself with such powers of concentration that everything remains in that immediate moment? Or is this a somewhat illusory state that we can't truly hold on to? That's what we're going to look at next. Since then, this certainty will no longer come forth to us when we direct its attention to a now that is night, or to an I to whom it is night. We will approach it and let ourselves point to the now that is asserted. We must let ourselves point to it, for the truth of this immediate relation is the truth of this I, which confines itself to one now, or one here. Were we to examine this truth afterwards, or stand at a distance from it, it would lose its significance entirely. For that would do away with the immediacy which is essential to it. We must therefore enter the same point of time or space, point them out to ourselves, that is, make ourselves into the same singular I, which is the one who knows with certainty. Let us then see how that immediate is constituted that is pointed out to us. In section 105, we're starting to see some of the problems with trying to maintain ourselves in this restored pure immediacy. One of the problems that's going to come up is the fact that it actually does take some sort of effort, as we've seen. So let's take a look at how that plays out. Hegel says that this certainty will no longer come forth to us when we direct its attention to a now that is night, or to an I to whom it's night. So what are we talking about here? In the previous section we've been talking about the I, which is looking at a tree, and which is taking in the fact that it's day as now. And that is the truth, that is the immediacy. For that I, so long as that moment can be extended out, so long as it can last. And it can't keep doing that, though, because we can also have an I, we do have an I, for which it's now night. And the question is that I really the same thing as this I? So he says, we have an I to whom it's now night, and so we have to approach it and let ourselves point to the now that's being asserted. We must let ourselves point to it. So when we're engaged in sense certainty, we're already seeing that it's, again, not a pure passive immediacy, receptivity. There's already a pointing going on, a focusing of attention, and it's being done by the I that's maintaining itself in this posture, in this moment, in this comportment, we can say, this directionality towards the object, towards the meaning that it's intending. So he says, we must let ourselves point to it. The truth of this immediate relation is in the truth of the I, which confines itself to one now or one here. So that's where the truth that we're going to keep is going to reside. And it's going to remain true so long as we can keep doing that. But you remember that just a few passages ago, we saw that truth of whatever it is, whatever content we have over here, can become stale. And how did it become stale? By something else coming in as the possibility for what is now, or as what now is now at this point. So he says, were we to examine this truth afterwards or to stand at a distance from it, we would lose its significance entirely. That would do away with the immediacy which is essential to it. So what do we have to do? We have to, as he says, enter into that same space and time in order to do that, in order to preserve it, in order to have the truth, in order to possess that certainty. But is this really possible for us? Not only do we have a shift between, say, this I and this I, if we exist over time, we're a whole sequence of I's, not just this one that happens to be here at this point in time. It would be sort of, if we want to do a kind of extended metaphor for this, imagine that in these videos, I was always wearing exactly the same outfit, so same tie, same shirt, same jacket, and we won't monkey around with the lighting stays the same, all that sort of stuff. Keep the sound levels the same. Would that be kind of strange? Would that keep things in that present moment? It would give you the illusion of staying in that present moment. It would give you a kind of illusion of continuity, wouldn't it? And I suppose if I, going back, let's say I get to video 300 of this series and I say, I want to be back in the same stuff as I was in sense certainty, and, forget the fact that I've already worn 2 different outfits because I shot at 2 different times for this. I'll put on this jacket and this tie and this shirt and tie my hair back in exactly the same ways. I better not have changed my glasses or anything so that I can come back to exactly this same moment. Would that really work? Is that truly possible? Can you regain that lost certainty, that lost truth of something that is bound by temporal and spatial coordinates? It's hard enough even just to put the camera and its tripod in the same place every time that I shoot, let alone to come back to the same content every time. So, Hegel goes on and he says, you know, if we're going to examine this truth, then it would lose its significance. So we would have to enter into the same point of space or time, point them out to ourselves, make ourselves into the same singular I who is the one who knows with certainty. So then he says, well, let's see if we can actually do this. How can we become that I?